So we're going to begin. My name is James Stevenson. I work for Childlight as a researcher, and I'll let my colleague introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ashleigh McFeeters, and I am a Global Data Fellow at Childlight, specifically the Policing Data Analyst.
And we have the great privilege of hopefully not introducing you to Childlight, but getting to tell you a little bit more about Childlight, which launched in March of 2023. So the following quote is the vision that Childlight was built on. We aim to shine a light, which has been a comment by many of the presenters at this conference so far. Shine a light on the darkness, shine a light through the use of data on pathways to impact and pathways to safeguarding children, both online and offline. Childlight has three core areas that we work in. The first is prevalence. So this is the capturing, analyzing, and publishing of accurate global prevalence and nature data. This is the research side of our work and what we'll be presenting on a little bit later in this presentation. We also focus on protection. This is advising frontline practitioners using our research on how to act on that CSEA data. And finally, we have our prevention efforts. This is advocating across and strengthening the systems to ensure that the right policies, legislation, and resources are in place to stop CSEA from ever happening in the first place. And this is accomplished through our to-be-launched technical advisory program. So a little bit about Childlight. Childlight is based at the University of Edinburgh. We are a global child safety data institute, and we're funded by the Human Dignity Foundation. You may have seen a few weeks ago, we had a significant funding agreement signed by the Human Dignity Foundation, which has established us for the next 10 years. So we have really strong ties and a strong foundation to build upon our research. We have two main research products. The first is our global index, which we'll be launching next week, and it's called the Into the Light Index. Again, playing on that theme of shining a light on child sexual exploitation and abuse data. The second is our annual Searchlight report. The Searchlight attempts to detail the nature of the abuse and harm done to children, both online and offline, and is a culmination of all of our research efforts for every year. If we look more broadly, Childlight has 5 pillars. The first is research and insight, of which the Global Index and Searchlight report are our main 2 products. We have education. In September, we will have the first group of Masters of Science students start at the University of Edinburgh, of which much of our research team are facilitating classes, and they will help to educate the next round of experts in this field. We also have communication and outreach. We have a communications director who is helping to launch our index and grow our influence in social media and in the online space. We have action. I mentioned the technical advisory program, as well as our strategy, operations, and administrative wing. So getting into Searchlight, getting into the data. Searchlight 2023 was the first of its kind to bring together a whole bunch of data from around the world on understanding the nature of CSEA globally. It was a groundbreaking work for us on who benefits from CSEA and what the burden is on society largely. And our hope is that with every year, we will publish more and more data to better outline what that prevalence is.
Thanks, James. So the first piece of research that I'm going to present on today is a scoping review of the coverage of studies that are actually measuring child sexual exploitation and abuse, victimization, prevalence globally. So this was done by colleagues Jingru Ren and colleagues at Childlight. So the study used a scoping review approach to better understand the global coverage of national and subnational studies published between 2010 and 2021. So a total of 404 studies with 673 data points reported overall prevalence of child sexual exploitation and abuse. So most of these data points actually come from high-income countries, whilst lower-income countries appear to have the lowest number, followed by upper-middle-income countries. So high-income countries, 416 data points, upper-middle-income, 86, lower-middle-income, 137, low-income, 34. So these disparities between the different data points and the different economic areas could be influenced by challenges such as limited financial resources, shortage of trained personnel, legal awareness-related impediments, cultural factors that actually would impede reporting. Then for the upper middle income countries, the challenge to sort of measure child sexual exploitation and abuse can come from a lack of donor and other kind of funding opportunities. So this is looking at the number of studies measuring childhood sexual exploitation and abuse by sex, male and female, per continent. So from this research, we find that there's 550 data points looking at female prevalence estimates and 375 looking at the estimates for males. In other words, we have 1/3 more prevalence studies on child sex abuse affecting females and males. So really we need to have this parity in our measurement to get the full picture of how CSEA affects people, children, globally. And as you can see from this graph, looking across all continents, there is more prevalence data that report female-only child sexual abuse estimates. However, South and North America and Europe had a better proportional representation of data that included both boys and girls.
So apologies, the slide bank I sent late yesterday is out of order. Looking at the online space, we conducted an online scoping review of child sexual exploitation and abuse, which found a number of studies, 82, from a period of January 2010 to June of 2023, and these were based on quantitative analysis only. What this found was that the largest proportion of studies were on CSAM, or the live streaming of sexual abuse. This was followed by online sexual solicitation and online grooming. When we look specifically at the CSAM studies, what we find is that younger children make up the majority of depicted victims, and they're often engaged in the most severe types of abuse. This was also found when we looked at specifically collections of CSAM by offenders that had been convicted. They usually had younger CSAM, or younger victims in their CSAM and more severe abuse. And this is similar across the data sets that we found for our upcoming index and indicator 3 on CSAM at large, which showed a prevalence towards prepubescent children and more severe type of CSAM. When we look kind of at what the trends are kind of forecasting, we see that peer-to-peer abuse and image-based abuse is leading to more and more imagery of older children being included in studies. When I look at online sexual solicitation, we see that the numbers of children engaging in sexual conversations in that first act of solicitation with children online is increasing, and that there were 17 studies that spoke to this metric. We found that these initial conversations were the starting point for sexual grooming and sexual abuse online and exploitation online. And these results are mirrored in our Into the Light index, which will come out on Monday, especially in the victimization and the perpetrator indicators, which showed, as Professor Michael Salter said, that often the most common form of online child sexual exploitation and abuse by perpetrators is to flirt or have sexual conversations with a child under the age of 18. When we look specifically at grooming, this is not just an online effort. It's an effort to create trust and compliance with children overall. But online, this takes a few different forms. One form is gift giving, another is secret keeping, and then providing children with access to materials that they may not have access to prior due to age. So that may be other types of pornography, it may be alcohol, or other types of banned substances to them. We often found that there was an element of deception used in grooming. So this was a misrepresentation of the age of the offender, their gender at times, and largely their identity. Offenders were pretending to be peers, they were pretending to be trusted adults in the child's life, or even celebrities to gain that trust and compliance. That's not what I want to be. Oh, we're all over the place here. When we look at CSEA among infants and toddlers, much of our data comes directly from CSAM data. We found no age disaggregated studies for this group, and what we found is that we're going to have to take a multiple systems estimation approach to understanding the true prevalence of this. So Dr. Mingyao Liu, one of my colleagues, has started that work and will be pursuing that in the future. So as you see, it's bringing together all the data sources, whether it's CSAM data, which we refer to here as big data, law enforcement data, and other administrative data sources together to understand the scale of this type of abuse. Now I go back. Another area that we found was a unique area of vulnerability was children living with disabilities online. Similar to children generally online, they were subject to online sexual solicitation and grooming. However, the tactics used by perpetrators involved a lot more threats and harassment and were far more engaged in terms of violent language. This group was especially vulnerable when we look at social isolation, and the younger the child in this group increased their vulnerability. Finally, one of our other major reports, and I'll only present on a few details of this, was a study conducted by Dr. Konstantinos Gaitis. And you can go to childlight.org and look at our dashboard to get the full study. But this was our XR study. So we looked at a legislative review, expert interviews, as well as a literature review as three separate sources to understand the role of extended reality in child sexual exploitation and abuse. What we found is that there is potential, and the understanding is just we're only at the nascent stage of how much harm this area can cause. We talk about haptic devices and teledildonics. There was no research that said that teledildonics had made its way into child sexual exploitation and abuse as of yet, but as a potential threat for the future, kind of merging that online-offline world even further. When we look at avatars, we see that this is an extension of a child's personage, both online and offline, and that the avatars were often being used as a way to continue abuse of children online. Generative AI has been a theme of this conference at large, and I think is something that many people are looking to engage in research in, and is something that Childlight is specifically looking to further research on. We also spoke about the age considerations as well as age assurance programs. Again, something that was largely covered at this conference was technologies around age assurance, and a number of the other organizations that have presented have set up some really strong solutions and something that should be invested in.
Thanks. Oh. Could you go back to the VAX, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So penultimate piece of research I'm going to report on. This was research carried out by Professor Arturo Harkawara, and it looks at the understanding the nature of child sexual abuse from the Violence Against Children and Youth surveys, the VAC surveys. So this looked across 16 different countries, and the aim is to facilitate evidence-based policy making and the development of targeted strategies in order to address CSEA effectively. So kind of 3 points, 3 data points I want to speak about is that self-reports of adolescents from age 13 to 17 years across 16 countries, Africa, Latin America, and Europe, found that 47% of girls and 53% of boys reported that their first experience of sexual abuse happened before the age of 13. With a different sample of young adults from 18 to 24 years old, we saw this increase in reporting later adolescent experiences, especially among boys. So this shows that proximity to the event may increase self-report recall in the surveys. And we found that within this sample of the 18 to 24-year-olds, that child sexual abuse prevalence is 17.2% for women and 8.2% for men. Again, more evidence shows that sexual violence mostly happens in a private home, and according to the data, 60 to 70% of victims report that the first event happened either in their own home, perpetrator's home, or someone else's home. And interestingly, we also found that child sexual abuse is also likely to co-occur, so there's this comorbidity of other types of abuse. 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 5 boys found that they also experienced physical or emotional violence during childhood.
Where's our conclusions? Here they are. So our conclusions, there needs to be more disaggregated data based on sex of victims. and this is lacking across all types of child sexual exploitation and abuse, but specifically in the online realm. And this is something that our Into the Light Index also found, was that there was a gendered study. There's need for further study into the potential harms of generative AI CSAM, and that we need to use our data concerning infants and toddlers to more accurately represent the scale of this problem. Again, one of our major solutions to a lot of the areas that we identified in terms of need for further research is our Into the Light Index, which we hope will grow year on year in terms of data input into the index and data that it's putting out on the global scale. And please look for that next week. We're also looking for partnerships to work together towards greater understanding. So if you have data from an area that is underrepresented in the research, or you underrepresented in the index, when you see it next week, please reach out to us. We are always looking for data partners. We are looking to expand our network and work collaboratively. We don't want to fill any research that's already ongoing, so PEER has been a really great conference for us. But we also want to be talking about a more global scale of this problem. We see this as a pandemic, and we really want to shine a light on this pandemic and this research because children can't wait. And I will put up our emails.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do we have time for questions? Any questions? No?
No.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm really interested in the baby toddler data because increasingly we are within Child Rescue Coalition developing a hypothesis. Thank you. Within Child Rescue Coalition, we're developing a hypothesis that actually somebody that is collecting baby toddler imagery poses a greater threat. So I'm interested in your thinking in terms of how you're going to develop that data and what work you are considering doing to factor that into risk assessments in terms of the threat that possessor or collector poses.
I think one of the major steps is we need to have disaggregated information on child sexual abuse for that age range, both in studies as well as within the CSAM data owners. 3 of the 5 major data owners already present a metric on infant and toddlers, or 0 to 2 age range, and IWF specifically will speak to the severity of that content. We need more of that work. We understand that this puts increased onus on those data organizations, and we understand that we can't commission it, but we would like to see that research because this is an age range that can't really speak to their abuse and can't speak for themselves. They aren't going to show up on survey data, so it's going to show up in the imagery, show up in more of the administrative data around law enforcement action or data sets like Child Rescue Coalitions, peer-to-peer. And I think that this is an area that we want to expand upon and find what is the overall prevalence, and then how we can influence that and identify potential offenders and perpetrators earlier. Did you have any comments?
No, covered it all.
What would you say would be the biggest gaps in terms of primary data that you would like to fill as an institute?
You can go first on this one.
I suppose it's getting access to primary data is kind of a first step. But I suppose it might be looking at offender pathways through, like, where does it begin? How can we actually stop it before it gets to such an extreme state that way? So we're always open to data partnerships to help fill these gaps within data.
I think for myself, it's getting more access to different types of online information. We know that many of the CSAM organizations and CSAM data owners are measuring hosting content and working at the ISP or the host level. Getting data directly from electronic service providers would be the ideal. I know that in a perfect, that is an ideal that I may never reach, but hoping and trying to reach that by closing the net around them, by getting all the other different data sources to create a sort of social pressure for them to release their data, so that we cover as much of the rest of the landscape, so that they are now the only organization that isn't providing data on this important metric and about the abuse of children. It's not just a metric, it's children being abused.
Are there any studies in terms of gathering primary data yourself that you'd like to commission in terms of Childlight? Is that on the card?
We are hoping to work with some of the ISP and hosting data owners in the future to collect data around blocked sites that are known to host ESAM first and foremost, and then looking further into the data, kind of using that as a proof of concept that we can be a trusted partner and someone that's going to accurately represent that data. So I think that's our next step.
We're going to hog it here. Right, so there's a gentleman over there, sorry. Can we just come back to that data bit? I've got a follow-up.
Hello, good evening. My name is Geoffrey from Tanzania National Police. Mine is not a question, just appreciation for the invitation, and because in Tanzania we have introduced the National Task Force dealing with child abuse and the human trafficking cases. Actually, it's a new task force, but we are doing our best to investigate. And in our task force, it is composed with professionals from different government institutions, like the Tanzania Police Force. There is social welfare. We have the prosecution service. We have the President Office member, prison service, and immigration officers, and actually the Anti-Human Trafficking Secretariat. On our side, we have problem in investigation, especially online investigation. This is because of the limited capacity for law enforcement agencies. But in our task force, because we are being centralized, and we have some different mentors who have actually given capacity building, we are able at least to fasten and attend those serious crime reported to the local police. And for this opportunity, I would call all professionals in the room to find a way if you can assist, because especially I have seen since day one, you have been talking about research, and I'm not sure back home if there is more research which has been conducted regarding to child abuse. These are voiceless, and maybe people has got no more interest about it, but the problem is escalating, it's a big problem, and I'm happy by using the terminology since day one that this is a pandemic, and I support that. So I welcome you guys, and to see on how you can help on the side of Africa, because technology, and you see the emergence of use of telephone and the internet, it is now a big problem, because you find a parent is giving her kid a phone. To them, they think it's giving them modern life, but because these young children also, they have been taken to school, they are also studying computer. So you find that a parent has got no knowledge what is going on when he's offering a telephone, or is giving them internet access at home. Then therefore you find that law enforcement agencies, and also with the limited capacity on investigating, also will be actually having a lot of problems. So it is my pleasure that I stand before you. And if you can support our African countries, especially Tanzania, we have Malawi, we have Kenya, and Zambia, who have attended these congregations, and it will be more fruitful, because child abuse is a transnational, and it has become a transnational organized crime, and especially for cyberspace. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
James, actually, can I just pick up on it? I'm not sure if it's a question or an observation. I'm becoming increasingly aware of what I would describe as the different ecosystems where offenders are operating in terms of viewing, sharing, and how the hash values differ and differentiate within those ecosystems. And it's just something just to think about in terms of your focus upon the prevalence and the profile and the severity, is to be able to differentiate and understand, right, what's being shared within the Tor. And Tegan and Anna this morning talked about the sheer scale of the number of searches and what they're seeing within the dark web. You know that we are seeing another set within the peer-to-peer network, and it generally, I think it's starting to look very different. You've then got the end-to-end encrypted environment as well, and it's how we as a set of professionals differentiate between the different communities and the material that's being disseminated within those environments, and how we are able to then collate that and recognise the scale of the threat within those different ecosystems and what the best response is. Because I'm not sure we're sophisticated enough at this moment in time to be able to actually create that complete picture. I'm not aware of it being done, and I think there would be some invaluable work to be done to bring that together.
That's one of our goals for especially Indicator 3 on child sexual abuse material, is to bring all, as you call them, different ecosystems of the online realm and the different types and ways that we've identified content in each of those realms together to almost fit it together like it's a puzzle. There's a bunch of different pieces, and we have some of the pieces, but some are missing. And so we have to keep looking constantly to find the full picture of the online landscape of child sexual abuse material. And I think the more that we can bring that material together, and we've done that with specifically hosting and uploading with the 5 data owners so far, the more we can bring that together, the more we can pressure certain groups and certain organizations to provide their data, because they will be the missing piece. And we'll have more and more of the information that says this is the source, this is where perpetrator is starting and moving, and this is how the movement of material online. And again, just a statement overall is that every piece of child sexual abuse material represents a child that's been harmed. And I think that's something that you always have to keep in mind when you're talking about CSAM in particular. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, the remote is incredibly complicated, so you'll have to excuse me. I'm just joking, Charlotte. It's very good. So my name is Cathal Delaney. I am the Director of Victim Identification Programs in Europe for Thorn. We're a US-based NGO, and we work to build programs and software to protect children online and to ensure that they're protected wherever they're going online from. So I'm going to talk to you today about finding signals in the noise, which I believe is a path that we can follow to ensure that we have a future for hash sharing, which is a method of detecting child sexual exploitation and abuse that has been used for a very long time and has become embedded in the ecosystem that we work together in, and is likely to be around for some time to come. And I want to talk about how to make that more effective. Just before I do, I want to thank Safe Online because they've provided a good amount of funding that has made some of the things that I'm going to talk about possible, including things like what has been already referred to is the Universal Classification Schema, and our own development of classifiers and their deployment with law enforcement agencies. And Safe Online has also, as was said yesterday, Murray spoke about it, have worked within HOPE in the global standard scheme, and also with Queensland Police and the NASK from Poland in creating the universal classification schema. So there's been a great amount of work done as a result of funding from Safe Online, and I think it's only right that we acknowledge that. So let's try this. There we go, doesn't seem so bad. So talking about finding children faster is one of the things that we do at Thorn, and finding children faster within the ecosystem that exists of law enforcement, of private enterprise, with hotlines wherever that information is available or is being circulated or is being discovered. It's important to be able to find children faster as a result of that activity going on. And that's what we endeavor to do. It's one of the pillars that our organization is built on. So in order to do that, what we try to do is to support investigators in their identification of victims, in their victim identification work and activity, by providing them with tools in the environments in which they are working already. Because that's where they can use the tools that we make available to them, and not if they're independent of their workflows, because that becomes very difficult for them. And by providing them with those tools, enabling them to accelerate victim identification, in other words, enable them to find children in the images whose abuse has been documented and who that those materials have then been circulated, being able to find them more quickly, and also while they are doing that, reduce the trauma that they suffer, the secondary trauma that they are exposed to as a result of having to view these images and to see them over and over again. So finding signals in the noise is important, because as things stand at the moment and have stood for many years, there have been great efforts to have standardized hash sets for child sexual exploitation and abuse. If you look at Project Vic in the US, if you look at the work that's been done by IWF, and Chris got the award here last night for attempting to do exactly that, and for creating a system that allows that to happen. But we are still in a situation where children's images are stuck on hard drives, they're stuck on servers, they're not being examined, and we are unable to share data that is going to effectively allow them to be found. And because that's the case, we can't acknowledge the hurt and the pain that has been done to them in the course of their material being created, in the course of the abuse that has been perpetrated against them. And that's because there's, and it's been said quite a lot over the last couple of days, law enforcement has a huge backlog of material that they need to be able to get through, and no effective means of actually doing that. And that means that basically there's too much noise for them to discern where the important information is. But that noise is children, and those children need to be heard, because the pain that they have endured, the hurt that has been caused to them, the abuse that they have suffered, all of those are things that need to be acknowledged and need to be we need to put an end to those in specific cases, and obviously in general as well. So in order to do that, what we need to do is to create a trusted hash ecosystem. And a trusted hash ecosystem is one in which you have quality control and standardization. And you also have visibility into what a hash means. So at the moment, we circulate hashes, and there's some hash sets that have additional information with them about the hash itself, other than the fact that it is just a hash of child sexual abuse material. But in general, that's not the case, and it's not done in a standardized way, and it's not done in a way that can be used across all of the sectors that are involved in this crime. So what we want to do is to build a hash system in which you have the hashes of material are created, Then those hashes are reviewed. Those reviewed hashes are then added into a compiled database or list of hashes along with the relevant information, and then that information is shared. There's another step that I'll go into later on, but that's what you want to do when you're creating a trusted hash ecosystem. So what is image hashing? I have a number of slides included here, both for the audience here and for those who may be watching online as well. So I'll go through them a little bit quickly. But hashing basically follows sort of two formats. There's binary hashing, which is the MD5 that's in the upper half of the slide here. And then there's perceptual hashing, which is pDNA, photodNA, created by Microsoft, which is in the lower half. And they are different because they represent the images in different ways, and they have different results when you're using them in the manner in which they were intended to be used. So the difference is that if you're using perceptual hashes, the likelihood is that you are going to be able to gather or group together images that look like one another, and that you'll be able to do that with a reasonable degree of certainty depending on how different the images are, and we'll have some examples in a minute. If you're using MD5 hashes, then the likelihood is that you're not going to be able to group those images together as easily, and it's going to take a lot more work, and it won't be as simple or as quick as you would need it to be. I spoke about speed and how important that is for victim identification. So perceptual hashes are also much larger than MD5 hashes, and they carry more rich information, and they work better because they allow a degree of latitude that binary hashes don't allow. So binary hashes will only match against an exact copy of the same image, whereas a perceptual hash will match against one that may have been altered slightly and that looks slightly different, but has almost the same qualities as the original image. So, for example, you have the lovely cats. Cats are always a favorite for any of us who work with computers, I think, and also for any of us who work in this field, because it's a way of getting a little bit of joy into your life. But this is the case with these images as well, because in these cases, if you're using perceptual hashes, each of these images will be matched. It's likely that given the parameters that you use the photodNA with or the perceptual hashing with, that these images are going to come in together in the same grouping. And pDNA hashing basically works like this. So you have the hash of the image is created. It's compared against an image that you believe or is in the system that you're checking, basically to see if there's a match for it. And then that image is also hashed, and the system then returns a result, and the result is, yes, I think this is probably the same image as the one that you've provided me with, and I'm reasonably happy to tell you that that's the case. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but I'm simplifying for effect. And yeah, so these images are ones that that will not be matched in that case. So I said there's a degree of latitude, and that degree of latitude will not be matched in these cases because the images are significantly different, because the cat is at different stages of the activity that they're involved in, and that the images aren't significantly similar enough for them to be pDNA matches. However, there are technologies that would allow them to be matched, like SIFT deduplication and matching. And these would flag these as similar because they have the same qualities in the image, because there are various different parts of the image that would match to other images, and there are ways that you can do that, and we have been investigating that and working on it quite hard, and also have some models in progress that do work with that, and methods that do work very well with that. What you don't want with photodNA, and what's also quite possible, is that you're going to have false positives, and that's where there is basically usually too much of the same type of information in an image. If you have images like these where there are multiple copies of the same image within it, I can't remember, collages, that's the one I was trying to think of, or where there's very low level, where the resolution in the images is very low, or it's very complicated and it's not very clear what's in the images at all, then it's likely that these could also be returned as a match. And there are ways also to mitigate that. So there are ways to figure out whether the images that are being reported as matches actually aren't, or whether they should be. So you can remove basically 90% of the incorrect matches if you follow these mitigation measures. So I want to talk a little bit now about image classification, because I've talked to you about hashing and what hashing is. And if we're talking about finding signals in the noise for future for hash sharing, it's sort of important to have a little bit of background. But image classification is not a new thing, but it is a method that's being introduced into law enforcement and other pipelines for processing child sexual exploitation and abuse that is going to be very useful going forward. So what image classification does is it uses machine learning to predict whether an image is or is not child sexual exploitation abuse, or of the different type that you might be looking for in a different use case. One of the drawbacks with classification, using classifiers basically, is that it's much slower than to compute than hashing, and it requires the entire image to be present when you're actually working on it. So you need to have possession of the image in order to be able to compare it against other images. What machine learning can do is it can learn things about images that are not on hashes. So it can find images that you're not going to find using a hash set, which is a very useful tool for investigators when they are looking at the totality of material that they may have, and being able to find a pathway to where particular child sexual exploitation and abuse material is, and then be able to explore that pathway further to find where the rest of the material is, and to find where material is that is not child sexual exploitation or abuse, but which may give them clues to identify who the victim is, again, saving them time. So that's one of the benefits. There are drawbacks and benefits to this. And at the end of the day, this is not an exact science. The results of classifiers are probabilistic, so it's predicting that it believes this is the case, given the information that you have previously provided it, that you have trained it on, basically. But it cannot decide, and it is not a method that you should use to decide whether something is child sexual abuse or not. It has to be reviewed by a human as well. But the point is that it reduces the time it takes for that information to be found. It reduces the amount of exposure that the investigator has, because they're not coming across material that I'm not expecting to see in a place where they're not expecting to see it. And by reducing the time and by reducing that exposure, it's reducing the trauma that they suffer as well. So when you're training image classifiers, what you need is the largest amount of data that you possibly can have. And that varies depending on a number of factors, but training a model to identify, for example, this lovely orange cat, you would want a lot of pictures of adorable orange cats. And training the classifiers means that the process learns basically from the examples that you provided. So as I said, the data that you provide will then decide what the classifier is actually going to be able to select from material. We have been able to collaborate with partners to get access to, not to get access to, but rather to be able to train our classifiers with CSAM material. And as a result, we've been able to create a number of classifiers which work very well for investigators, and which we've also made available to them. Well, so image classification, I'm so glad that this is actually working right, because you never know. You basically have the image of the cat, and then that image is fed through a matrix, through a machine learning matrix, and then at the end of that, you come with the results, where the orange cat comes out there at 80, is it 98%? Yes, 98%, and the likelihood that it's a black cat is very low at 0.02. On the other hand, when you have an orange cat that's in a different scenario, and there are other factors in the background, basically where it's a picture of an orange cat which is not like any that the classifier has seen before, then the likelihood is that it's probably going to do this. It's going to say, I don't know, I'm not sure. So it's not going to be sure in either case, but it's far less sure, basically, in this case. So, yeah, the other thing about classifiers is that you need to retrain them. So they're not a one and done thing. You need to be able to retrain them. We retrain our classifiers every 6 months. and you need to do that because otherwise you're not making use of the new information that is available. As I said, you need to train it against the material that is available, and by doing that, you ensure that it's up to date and that is likely to be more accurate and predict better for you and save you more time. So I want to talk about classifiers now and what they're going to look like soon. So our classifier is working at the moment for investigators, and it is working in these three tools with Magnet Grify DI Pro, with Magnet Axiom and Automate, and with Bluebear Lace. And the purpose of that the investigators use that for is that they first go out and they search a house. When they search the house, they seize material. When they bring the material back to the lab, their forensic examiners, or if it's the investigators themselves, will then use forensic tools. And with those forensic tools, if they're one of the ones that we have the classifier already in, then they will be able to reduce the time that it takes them to find the child sexual abuse material on that equipment. And as has been said over the last couple of days, that could make the difference between being able to charge somebody or not while they're in custody, or it could be the difference between being able to find a victim that is being abused by the offender who you have in custody at that particular time. For me, that's really the more important thing. We did a user survey, and I stress it is a user survey, so it's not super scientific either. But the users reported to us that the least amount of time that they were seeing saved was when their case was the smallest number of images and videos. And the most amount of time what they were seeing saved was when they were with the very largest cases. But they were seeing between 50 and, you can see, they were estimating between 15 and 45% of their time was being saved. Again, I would take it with a little grain of salt because it's not scientific, but it's still their impression of the time that was being saved, and that's also an important factor to take into account. I want to talk to you about something that we're basing our next generation of classifiers on. It is the Universal Classification Schema. And the schema itself breaks down in these particular ways. Maria has also already described it, and some other colleagues have also referred to it in the last couple of days. You have categorization of material, you have the investigative elements that you would like to apply to material, and also then you have the demographic elements that you want to identify in relation to material itself. So the categorization elements, I'll just go over this very briefly because I have more detail on the next slide. But what they allow you to do is to differentiate between what is happening in different images and videos to an extent that you can then understand what the nature of the offending is in the images and potentially what the offender's own interest in those particular images is, because that may or may not reflect if he is abusing or she is abusing, very unusually, what their preference is and what age group, for example, they might be interested in. So the schema breaks down, and the way that we're approaching it is as 4 different classifiers. So you have one for person, so that's establishing whether there's a real person or an artificial interpretation of a person, or a blend between the two. And the important part there is not which of those is the case, but rather whether there is a person present or not, because if there's no person present, then you can't have a child sexual abuse material, basically. The next one is the apparent maturity. So looking at the maturity of the individuals who are in the images, and this sort of also goes to the question that you were asking a minute ago, Simon, in relation to being able to get data about different age groups within CSAM, because if we're able to work these classifiers right, then it's going to be able to do that at scale. You're going to be able to produce good statistics, basically. I hate talking about statistics when you're talking about children, but it's also important. But you're going to be able to identify what abuse is being done to children in particular images and sets of images, and where those images come from different environments, what the prevalence is in those different environments as well. And then sexual activity, the different types of sexual activity that are taking place from the most severe down to the least severe. Most sexual activity against children obviously is illegal, but we do break it out, or rather it was broken out by the Universal Classification Schema, because we wanted to have these granular levels available to us. And then nudity in terms of genitalia seen, not seen, and partially unclothed as well. So what am I getting at here? What I'm getting at is that the way that we can look at hash sharing in the future is if you have quality information about the hash and where it has come from and what information is included with it and what categories it fits into, and you're able to combine that information together and put it into a hash set and then share those hash sets within law enforcement, within industry, within NGOs and hotlines, I mean within those sectors at the outset at least, then you have a very powerful set of information and reliable information that you can use to determine what the level of abuse is that is going on in the images and what offenders are doing in their collections of material and how they have created them, how they have gathered them together, and what also the source of that material was, looking at what those platforms were, the activity was, and so on. So it's potentially a very powerful tool for investigators, for content moderators, for hotline analysts to be able to look at this information and use it very quickly, because you don't have to use the classifiers, you can use the hashes. You use it very quickly to understand the nature of material that you're examining, and in a fraction of the time that you would have before. So I talked earlier on about creating a trusted hashed ecosystem that is where you have the hashes, then you verify the hashes, then you compile them, and then you share them. But the trick is being able to do this at scale, because we've already heard that the amount of material that is in existence, that is in circulation, that is way beyond the capability of most investigators or police forces or manual content moderation processes and so on. So being able to do it at scale means that you use classifiers to do it. You use classifiers to assist in the creation of those hash sets. So you classify the material, then you verify it with a human. Having the human in the loop is essential. And then you compile that material into a hash set, and then you share it. You share it within law enforcement, you share it within industry, you share it within NGOs, and then you are benefiting from the work that others have done already. You're not redoing the work that they have already done, and you're being able to save a great deal of your time. And the more specific the classifier is, the more time you're going to save, because you're going to have more information about those particular images and how they've been added to the hash set as well. So the outcome will be that more children will be saved as a result of the time that you are saving using these methods. So what are the next steps? The next steps are to really be able to roll this out, to be able to, we are in the alpha stages of creating classifiers that will meet these requirements. It takes a long time. Maria spoke yesterday or earlier today, actually, about some of the efforts that we have already made in creating hash sets, or data sets rather, that are labeled according to the schema, and in Hope are doing the same thing. So we're building data sets that are going to be valuable for the creation of these classifiers. Implement the systemic building of trusted hash sets, and that's about talking with law enforcement, talking with partners in all of these different areas that I've talked about already, about having a systematic approach to creating hash sets and being able to share them within the specific sectors. Sharing those hash sets with the metadata, so not just the hashes on their own, but with the metadata that's been created, that's been added to them, about the source, about the classifier that's been used, about what police force it has come from, or what particular industry provider has created it. And then using the time that is saved as a result of creating those hash sets and using them in your different processes, using that time and concentrating it to be able to save victims with these methodologies. So I talked about finding signals in the noise at the start, and what we want to be able to do is to go from this overwhelming noise to these patterns in the noise, to finding the signals in the noise, because the signals are the children who we want to be able to save. I firmly believe, after working on this for quite a long time now, that this is a model that we can follow that will mean that we can take action, that we can share these hashes effectively, that we can acknowledge the harm that is being done to children in the sexual abuse material that is being circulated around them, that we can acknowledge, as has been said so importantly over the last couple of days, we can acknowledge the victims and survivors of this crime, and that the material that has been created relating to them, that material can be found, that it can be taken out of circulation, and that ultimately those victims, those children and the survivors, whether they're children or adults, that they will be heard, that they will be believed, and that they will be acknowledged by finding the signals in the noise. Any questions? The mic is coming. I should say Charlotte is coming, but we're much kinder.
Thank you. Brilliant presentation. Thank you. Really informative. I know a lot more than I did half an hour ago. However, I am coming at this from a place of ignorance, so my question may be completely silly, and if it is, please tell me.
There's no silly questions in this room, I can assure you.
So you talked about the early part of your presentation, different hashing methods, and I was wondering, is there a use case for SIFT deduplication and matching? And I asked that thinking back to talks on Project Arachnid, where they're looking for non-illegal but still harmful images that may be from the same scene or etc. Would SIFT deduplication and matching be able to find similar images from the same thing using that process?
Yes, it can, and that's why it's a good use case for it is victim identification, because you can have images in the offender's possession which don't relate necessarily to transsexual abuse, but do provide clues about children who are being abused. So what we would call, what is the word? Help me here, Amanda. Benign images, that's the one, thank you very much. Amanda's not involved in this presentation at all, but she's very generous. Yeah, benign images, basically, which will allow an investigator to look at them and find a clue about a location where a victim is, or a clue about a nationality that they most likely are, or a language that they speak or that they read, something like that. So yes, it is a good use case for that as well.
Thank you. I have one more, but should I? Sorry. Who would host or be responsible for the hash set and schema database?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we have got hung up on over the years, is the idea that there has to be a central database of all this material. There doesn't, not with this methodology, because you have, and that's why I say it's a trusted ecosystem, because if you have the same methodology applied across all of those that are using the system, then the hashes and the metadata that travels with them, you can be assured that it is child sexual abuse material. And you're only going to be matching it against something which you have in your possession. So it's not going to be the case that you have a hash and you can't verify that it's child abuse material. But you do have to buy into doing it systematically and agreeing to the set of rules by which it's done. So we don't have to have a central database. More than likely, there will be central databases. There already are, but you don't have to have them in order for the system to work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. That was great. I just had a question regarding the image classification slide. From your slide, I just assumed that you have used techniques like neural network maybe. I just wondering, have you ever tried some Bayesian image classification techniques to reduce the uncertainty when you do your prediction? Or if yes, does it help to reduce the uncertainty?
My answer to your question is, I don't know. Because I'm not, and I'm not being funny, I'm not a data scientist. So we're blessed. We have a team of data scientists that work at Thorn specifically on this problem, and I rely and lean very heavily on them to answer those sort of questions. So if you want to talk to me afterwards, I will get you an answer for that question.
Thank you.
Cathal, thank you. I've got two questions. Have I interpreted the schema right, that it would afford academics the opportunity to look at the data within the schema to then do the research that actually would then start to identify the specific profiles in terms of age, severity of abuse, type of abuse, and that then takes us to a place I don't think we're currently at, where you could actually put in a query, I presume, and say, I now want to know the answer to this question.
Yeah,
is that right?
It's one of the potential applications of the schema. So, I mean, the thing about the schema is the way it is at the moment is in an idealistic state. So that is the way that we would like it to be used and used to its fullest extent. Whether that's the case or not, we suspect it's not, because some of the level of granularity that is in it will not suit every use case. But where those tags are being applied, and as was said last night at the awards, where you have all of the tags that are being applied, then you would be able to get that sort of information from a system that is using them.
And a tag I don't think I saw was when the schema is looking at images, is it going to be able to identify a series? And will it then, because I'm now thinking from an operational perspective and something like Artemis, where you've got a schema looking at hopefully what will be, well, say hopefully,
I know.
It will look at millions of images. It would be, operationally, it would just be invaluable that it was to say, having gone through this, we now think all these images are part of a series. From an investigative perspective, you know the value as well of that as well as I do.
Yeah, so if we use a data model like the VIX data model, so the VIX data model is very widely adapted already. It's used in a lot of different forensic tools, and it's widely recognized. So if you use a model like that and you include in your tagging of material that it is part of a series, then yes, it will be able to reflect that. And that is one, it's not in the part that you saw there because I showed you the overall view, but it's one of the investigative tags. And what it would also allow for is things like where investigators would come across an image and they would think, well, that's not CSAM, but there's something about that that's making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. So I'm just going to tag that. I'm going to say that's of investigative interest, and that they would be able to put that in there as well. So there is a host of tags that I didn't show that we do intend would be utilized along with this, but and that would be one of them, that it would be part of a series as well.
And forgive me because I'm hogging the mic. Is anybody else? Okay. And I hope this is not an unfair question. If it is unfair, just say, Simon, that's not fair. Ideally, the global ecosystem would adopt this schema. Ideally, I would suggest.
Yes.
I don't think we're kind of anywhere near that at the minute. But could the technology that underpins the schema be adapted to cope with the nuances of different organisations and different interpretations of what's good and bad to get to the same result? Because I think you and I would violently agree with each other. Hate the thought that there are tens of millions of images sitting in database that are yet to be classified. That's not good.
No.
But if the technology has been developed that actually is able to do that differentiation and say, this is an image of a child being abused, how you then classify it and the language that you then use to classify that, it almost, from my perspective, and I'm being a little bit cavalier with my words, it almost becomes an irrelevancy because you just want that image classified and you want the victim then into the system whereby you can start to think about how you go about identifying them. So is that a reasonable concept to be developing, or is that?
Yeah, no, I think it's not an unfair question, and it's something that we have thought about quite a lot when we were creating the schema. I was lucky enough to be one of the people who was involved, but by no means driving it. And that is the thing that we would want to happen, is that the investigators ultimately don't really care, in a professional way, in an empathic way, about what is in the image, but they are able to use the classifier to provide them with information about it once they've verified that is the case. Are we there yet? No, we're a good distance from there, but work that InHope are doing at the moment and work that they have planned in the future is to have a set that can be basically labeled by each, a standard set basically that can be labeled by each partner that is using the system, and then that set is then passed into a matrix which learns basically the way that they want the material to be categorized. So it's a translation matrix basically, and then you can the system can adapt according to the particular use case of the agency, of the content moderation system, of the hotline, whatever it might be. I mean, that's why you have that level of granularity in there, is to allow that sort of adaptability to take place.
I find that really encouraging, because Ian, I think that's a massive step forward. I really do. And look, I recognise it's still in the test phase and there's still a lot more work to be done, but actually to get to the point where you can start to have some confidence that actually we are now being able to classify this material, that speeding up the process just means that those children that are being abused stand a slightly better chance of them being identified, which
Absolutely.
can only be what we're all trying to achieve.
That's why I think it's important to do.
Yeah, I agree. Are there any other questions?
Anybody who asks is standing and standing against people going out, right?
Well, hopefully there's
They're
a
all
whole lot
coming
of
back.
people flooding in a minute.
Yeah, it looks like there's a crowd outside the door waiting, or else it's just darkness, one or the other. So,
Right, we'll unless there's any other questions, Cathal, thank you.
okay.
Look, I'm only sorry there weren't more people in the room, but look, that's been hugely informative. I'm sure it'll have been streamed. It'll be there for people to then download. So thank you, mate. It was great.
Okay, thank you very much.